We all know the new Air Zoom Mercurial from Nike, which is actually the 17th generation of the Mercurial football boots. So today I've come here to beautiful Berlin to go all the way back to 1998 and go through every single generation of the Mercurial to give you an idea about why we are where we are today. I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Ben Stewart, and just a word of warning, it's going to get really, really nerdy. Let's do it. So Ben, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, great to be here.
Pleasure to have you here. There's a lot of boots on the table. We're gonna try and make it like snackable for you guys because we could talk, I guess, for hours.
Days.
This is basically like the nerdiest of talks you'll see today. But let's start from the beginning. 1998, Mercurial R9.
Yep.
Give us the story.
So I'm actually gonna pull it back a couple of years before that, right?
Sounds good.
We have an incredible new talent, right? We just signed Brazil in the mid-90s. We have an incredible young, dynamic R9. And internally, the team's thinking, how do we create a boot that matches that speed, the way that he plays, his style? So they got after an internal concept called Tiempo Ultralight at the time, right? How do you make a football boot feel more like a track spike? They start cobbling with different things. It matures, and a couple of years later, we have the original R9.
Which is a pretty groundbreaking piece of football boot technology.
Absolutely. Like if you start at the plate here, this plate was almost half as thick as plates in the market at the time, which reduced the weight significantly.
Yeah.
It's one of the first boots under 250 grams. But it wasn't just underfoot, right? We had to make the whole thing lighter and faster. So introduced for the first time the K&G 100 leather upper.
Which was a pretty big game changer because that also meant that you could really play with colors.
You play with color, you could express it, right? Innovation isn't just on the performance side, right? Innovation can also be on the visual side as well. And this allowed us to really capture that mercurial nature, if you will, within the expression of the boot. But it was also incredibly functional, right? Less water uptake, thinner upper, and then the nice sticky coating to make sure you had that control at high speeds.
Exactly. And that sticky coating actually was fine-tuned a little bit. 2 years after the Mercurial R9s came, we got to see the Match Mercurial in 2000. Still K&G 100, a little bit of a rearranged sticky coating and a new tooling as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just to evolve something that we had just done. We set a new benchmark in the industry in '98. Okay, how do you come back and build off of that, not recreate the wheel, because we literally just did, right? So it was all about maximizing that traction into the ground for those explosive starts. And like you said, just tuning that the sticky coating in that K&G 100 upper.
Because the thing was, back with the Mercurial R9s, that was, if I'm not too mistaken, the first bladed stop pattern we'd really seen, the first molded bladed stop pattern.
I think you're right, yes.
And that was just a game changer in terms of aggressiveness and responsiveness when you're pushing off, right? And that fine-tuned it a little bit.
It did. And this was part of the overarching kind of alpha project that we were doing at the time, right? Which was our most pinnacle expression of boots or shoes across all of the sports. So it really, it just kind of took it to that next level and put it on the same level playing field as the rest of our pinnacle product across the company.
Exactly. But you then introduced another pinnacle project 2 years after, which was in development for, well, you tell me, but it was in development for a long time, right? 2002, Mercurial Vapor 1.
And this boot changed the game. This changed the game. Yeah. And then to me, this is your first interpretation of modern speed boots.
Oh, yes.
This is the one that kind of started all of that lineage. I actually, as an anecdote, I was afraid to buy this myself going into the store for the first time because I thought there's no way a boot so light, right, under 200 grams, could support the movements on pitch, but it certainly did.
And one piece upper, super thin Nike skin, exactly. and just so ridiculously light. Whole new last, much faster, sleeker, like you said, built on a track spike. And that outsole, which was just ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Snappy, aggressive, really like changed the game. Mercurial R9s are iconic because they introduced the whole thing, but this was like the first refined big bang.
I would agree. I would agree. And the moments that you saw in these boots, right? Whether it was the commercials at the time, right, that took it to the next level, whether it was Ronaldo doing his thing in 2002 in the World Cup final, right? This boot was a real game changer.
What do you think twisted more heads back then, the hairstyle or the boots?
Oh, it's got to be the chrome shining in those lights, but the hairstyle was pretty bold as well.
Yeah, and that colorway, by the way, is amazing.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. Then 2 more years went by and we got the Mercurial Vapor 2s, which was more of a, you tweaked a few things, made it slightly more comfortable, higher heel counter, and went with the same recipe. So.
Exactly. Again, we had just made a big step on top of a big step, right? So it was just the fine tuning, a little bit a refinement in the molding detail, a reduction in the back tab height here a bit, but generally, just a very similar but very dynamic boot here.
Absolutely.
In the Vapor 2.
Which was also nice to focus a bit more on comfort after the Vapor 1. It was ridiculously fast, but it took some, should we say, sacrifice to break them in.
It did. Once you broke them in,
they were nice.
That upper was fantastic.
Yes. But it did take, you needed to live with a blister or two, I think we can all agree on. That was the deal back in the day. Things have changed.
They have.
Now, 2006, Vapor 3s, big change.
Yes. Carbon fiber in the heel to create more lockdown, more structure. Yeah. Obviously, you had the pour-on pods, which were again meant to create and help that comfort. A re-engineered upper here, same idea of keeping that minimal barefoot-like touch, and then underplate, we actually put the chassis internally for the first time and gave that really beautiful 360-degree wrap, which, comes back into play later on in the line. And the podular design here, really reinforcing that speed visual. Yeah. And it was actually trusted by quite a few members on this pitch in 2006 in the World Cup final.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, history was being made. If you don't know, we're at the Olympiastadion in Berlin. So there you go. It came back home, so to speak. Then you took another drastic change. 2008, you introduced a lace cover.
Yes.
On the Mercurial Vapor 4 and the Mercurial Vapor 4 SL. And also, there were a few other radical changes. Still Tahitian upper, but you played a bit with glass fiber, other things. What were the thoughts behind that? Pretty big radical change.
Yeah, I think it was very much a continuation of kind of what we started in the 3, but okay, where could we take it? Where were those new spaces that we could make hopefully some meaningful change to the athlete? And one of those was focusing on that boot to ball connection into the upper. And that's where you got this lace cover that was to promote that clean striking surface in the upper. Yeah. But yeah, with the glass fiber locked down in the heel as well. And so, yeah, this was a nice jump forward.
And also a pretty big visual change. This is when we got introduced to that big toe swoosh, right?
It was, right? If you think back to Carbon SL, really the first time we moved that lateral swoosh to the forefoot, became an icon, right? Especially of the Superfly line going forward. And then you even look into the colorways that we played with. I believe 2008 was the first time you saw a cohesive on-pitch pack at a big tournament moment for the Euros. So it was a really good time both for the performance and the visuals of the boot.
Absolutely. And you said it yourself, Mercurial SL. Now we don't have it right here with us. We're going to show you some images on screen right now. But that was another boot that just completely threw out the rule book.
It was.
And just did whatever it pleased.
It was. The team was challenged at the time to say, okay, if cost limitations, if engineering limitations were thrown out the door, what would you create, right? What did that future look like? So it was the first time that anyone had ever bought a boot to market that was both carbon fiber plate and carbon fiber upper, and that boot was in development for over 3 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
You made 2,008 pairs of them.
That's
FG at least 500 SG, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And it was perhaps not a boot you would go and play a full season or two in, but it was functional and it was just so out there.
Yeah.
And really fun to see how that set the tone for future ultra releases like we're seeing.
And you're absolutely right. Like that was the original football concept car, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? How do you push those limits and what do you learn from that to then put back into the line?
Yes. And you learned a couple of things, especially playing with the carbon fiber tooling, which you took into the Superfly 1.
Yes.
Which was a bit of a, you know, I wouldn't say controversial boot, but it definitely also, you know, it split opinion.
It did.
Because you did a few things. You introduced the carbon fiber tooling, but also Flywire.
Yes. So the purpose of the Flywire at the time was to really capture that lightweight, dynamic, but a really good strength to weight ratio, if you will, as far as the support and the medial lateral. It was our first take of it in a football boot, but that concept and that idea of innovating for that lockdown, for that Merc player that needed those fast, explosive starts, it made sense.
Yeah, and it probably, you know, haters will say that it made a bit more sense on paper than in reality, but it definitely turned heads.
It did.
And it was an important, I think, an important step into working with lockdown and you know, less bulk when we're talking about.
Agreed.
And it was a really cool boot to
the
look
blocking.
At. Oh yeah.
The pink swoosh.
Absolutely.
You weren't missing this.
No, absolutely not.
No.
And then, you know, again, I wouldn't use the word controversial, but maybe also the two boots after that split opinion a little bit, Superfly 2 and Superfly 3. We're gonna bolt them together because they were basically the same boots, more or less.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this boot took some big swings.
Oh, it did.
It did.
And some bold swings.
Right, it did. But again, all going back to how can we change the game? How can we make those players faster? That's always at the core of what we're doing. Sometimes you take some big swings and they work. Sometimes you take some big swings and you take the learnings from those,
yes.
right? And I think that's what we did here with the 2 and 3.
Yeah, and you know, we obviously need to touch a little bit more Flywire there. Which also made the upper sturdier.
It did.
Made the boot a little bit heavier, but then you focused on the traction here.
Yeah.
Nike Sense. Now, it has been the butt of some jokes because it was, and it does move a little bit. We all saw the commercial with the claws coming out into the ground. But what was the idea behind it?
The idea was these Merc players need that incredible traction right off the get, right? It's all about separating from defenders and going. And the idea was that if you could activate that stud, get a little bit more ground penetration, you were going to get that quick acceleration off the line.
So just a little bit more force into the ground.
Exactly.
Transfer of force, a little bit more responsiveness.
Exactly.
But it didn't move much, so. But it was a popular boot on the other hand. And that elite pack for the World Cup,
yeah.
So do you think it's fair to say that maybe the boots, performance-wise, didn't exactly hit where you wanted, but from a colorway and being iconic point of view?
I think this was one of the first times where you saw us trying to bring performance through the visuals, meaning these colors at the time were picked specifically because we knew that they popped off of the green pitches, and it was to make that visual acuity and that connection that you could see your teammates more quickly when you saw this orange popping up and fluttering across the pitch.
Yeah, and we have the CR7 Safaris. Doesn't get much more iconic than that.
It doesn't, no.
And you know, you saw them back in the day and thought, that's a bit wild. But when you look at them now, that is, you know, from a visual point of view, maybe as groundbreaking as the first two, the Mercurial R9s and the Vapors were.
Yeah, bringing our iconic Safari to this boot for Cristiano, like it was just the best of all of these worlds coming together, right? It was very much, you know, how do we take Nike and Cristiano to that next level and bring those two worlds together.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you've been pretty good at spotting these guys, right? You saw R9, you saw Cristiano at a young age, gave him a signature line. Look at where we are today.
Years later.
Look at where we are today. Then there was a little bit of a jump. After that, we had the Vapor 8s and the Vapor 9s, which, at least for me, you can tell me if you agree or not, but that was like a return to the core essence of the Mercurial.
How good was that mango upper?
ridiculous. And you know, the Superfly 2 and 3, they were a bit on the thicker, stiffer side. We returned to a minimalistic, super lightweight, glass fiber tooling.
Yep.
And it was just like, it felt as if that was what maybe even the Vapor Full could and should have been. Vapor 9s, more or less the same thing, little bit of that golf
ball dimpled upper.
Yeah. And just very popular boots overall.
Incredible to play in.
Yeah.
Right? Light, dynamic, quick on the pitch. Yeah. Those are great.
And also very, you know, good tactility. Really redefined what a lightweight speed boot could be. Yeah. And then you basically went and threw the rule book out the window again, only this time it worked so well.
Extremely well.
Put it like that.
And this boot here changed the game in so many different ways, right? Yeah. Talking about FLYKNIT upper and the introduction of that 2 years prior at the London Olympics. And the discussions internally were, you know, how do we use this material and maximize it for football? And it was a little controversial internally, right? Football players are very particular about their uppers and what they want. But when you think about FLYKNIT and you think about football, it really just makes sense because you get the pliability, you get the zonal tuning of the lockdown. All we had to do is figure out how to weatherize it and make it durable for the game. No easy feat, but team got after it.
But you did it, and that and the Magista really like flipped the game on its head.
Absolutely, and the introduction of the dynamic fit collar at the time, it wasn't just an incredibly well playing boot, it changed silhouettes and how people viewed football boots.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And you know, to be fair, you know, that really also, for me at least, brought the Superfly line back to being super. That was something completely wild, completely unexpected, and something that players loved, both from a performance and a visual point of view.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that carbon fiber tooling is spectacular. And then you did it again. You dropped carbon fiber, but you introduced nylon in the outsole for the Superfly 5 and the Vapor 11, which is my personal favorite, the Vapor 11. Talk us through that. Brio cables really came into play after being present at the Superfly 4.
Brio cables, a bit of textured FLYKNIT in the upper, that tactility on pitch, again, moving, dribbling at high speeds. The real game changer here was the synergy of plate, right? You had an anatomical footbed that felt like you were just in an F1 car, seated, supported, and then a stud pattern that, if you look at current day speed boots, this became the benchmark starting in 2016.
Yeah, just compare it to the Superfly 4 real quick.
Yep.
Just look at those aggressive chevron studs. Right
Again, maximizing all of that that force into the ground and making sure that players felt confident when they're coming out of the starting blocks.
Yeah, great boot, and also that, you know, that anatomical tooling. It changed the game.
It's incredible.
Again. Now we mentioned the Mercurial. That was a big of a concept boot. You did it again with the FLYKNIT Ultra, which came a little bit out of left field. No one really saw it coming. And while it was still just, you know, it was a bit of a FLYKNIT boot with a Superfly 5 tooling on it, it also changed things up a bit. Can you take me through why?
Sure. This upper is probably one of the more revolutionary uppers in terms of the materiality of it. So traditionally on a FLYKNIT boot, we need to bring that weatherization, that durability in with an additional layer of skin. The yarns in this boot that make up this particular FLYKNIT boot are covered in a very thin TPU coating that when pressed and introduced to temperature and pressure actually melt onto itself without the additional layer of that skin over top. So everything is integrated and just brought that foot that much closer. The break-in time is almost non-existent and one of the best boot-to-ball vapors we've ever produced.
Yes, and such a massive shame that it wasn't, I think a lot of people feel who wore it, that it wasn't brought out as a mass release boot.
We put it through its paces. There was still some things left to be desired, which is why we kept it in its numbers. But you know, we continue to innovate. We're not throwing everything out, and yeah, maybe there's still some life for something like this in the future.
And the worst bit of it was you never made it in JayMike size. I was like,
Sorry about that.
Yeah. I still haven't recovered from that one. But it also was the precursor to the Vapor 12, which used that whole fusing of the yarns, meaning that now you could actually build the upper and not weatherize it. So basically before you had the FLYKNIT upper and you just slapped a piece of silicone on top.
Right.
Now you could basically engineer the whole thing, use texture, all that stuff, all in one.
And so you have those TPU coated yarns. You still do have a bit of skin around the bite line for a bit of weatherization, but far more exposed knit than we ever have before in the commercial offering as a Vapor. And then the real introduction here, right, was almost a revert back to some of the internal chassis of the past. And what we liked about this is that incredible wrap you got, right? That FLYKNIT wrapping underneath, really hugging that arch and creating that nice compression in the midfoot.
And it's also one of those boots that, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well, but it really brought comfort in a different sense into the Mercurial line.
Yeah.
As we talked about, you know, Mercurial previously had been something that you had to live with it being relatively snug, relatively narrow, and that was just the name of the game for a speed boot. But this slightly wider last, super comfortable upper.
And snug and narrow are still kind of benchmarks of the fit of Mercurial, right? It differentiates it from other boots in our line. But with the evolution of materials and modern day materials, we can also introduce that comfort that maybe a couple of years ago wasn't as available based on the material options and selections. But you know, the team's been innovating around these materials, and it brings that additional level of quick break in time. And yeah, I want to wear my Vapors over the full 90 minutes.
Exactly. Then 2018 came about, and well, that was 2018. We have 2019 with the Vapor 13, where you once again changed up the game with the FLYKNIT upper. Can you tell us why that was?
We went to a little different FLYKNIT here. We introduced high tenacity yarns within within the FLYKNIT boot here, kept and maybe improved the soft pliability of the previous version. This boot was a dream once you put it on, and I think that was evidenced by the quick adoption in the Women's World Cup final, right, that we saw Rapinoe wearing on pitch. So this boot is still one of the most comfortable Mercurials, but dynamic and fast and quick.
And you could say that the high tenacity yarns kind of worked like Flywire was, you know, it was the same concept, but just made more dynamic, more adaptable.
Light, thin, strong throughout the FLYKNIT upper, making sure that midfoot was supported, making sure that the forefoot had the support that it needed in those quick changes.
Yeah, and it didn't look half bad either.
No, that graphic.
Exactly.
Stunning.
And then you did something maybe to some people slightly unexpected. You actually went away from FLYKNIT on the Vapor 14 and Superfly 8. Introduced Vapor Posset. Slightly more, you know, traditional synthetic upper like we've seen back in the days.
Yeah, this was a different take on that design process. You know, how could we maximize each material specifically and design it specifically for different functions across the boot. So that led us to bringing different materials together to really get the most out of each of those materials. So you have a synthetic layer that's underneath and is really kind of your chassis of this boot here. And then over top for that tactile touch, you have a very nice engineered upper where it's a little bit more open in the toe box. It gets a little bit more condensed in the midfoot for that support. And this dragonfly colorway.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah. Follows the trend of nice launch colorways.
Absolutely.
And now obviously we're where we are today. So we all know the brand new Superfly. Obviously there's also the Zoom Ultra. If you just want to quickly go over how that was revolutionary.
Absolutely. Zoom had been and is a part of our DNA at Nike for years and years. And we've used it in football boots all the way back to the Zoom Rio.
Oh yeah, in 1996,
There you go, in the Zoom GX.
Yes.
So it wasn't that we didn't think that Zoom was right for football, but we really didn't have that unlock on how to maximize it for football. We'd either put it under the sock liner, we'd either put it into the plate. But taking some cues from our basketball friends, where they were able to create a strobel that was all Zoom. So simply that was the upper being stitched straight onto the Zoom bag and being put into a plate, right? So that really maximized that feel, that bounce, that spring that we know you get from Zoom. So we took those learnings and we put them into the new Superfly 15 or 9 and Vapor 15.
Yeah. Which kind of gathers everything you've learned over the years and just, you know, a really well-performing boot.
Yeah, we love what this boot is doing, right? This is the first time learning from that KD12 bag that we were able to engineer a Zoom bag specifically for global football. You know, low to the ground. We were able to put strategically placed flex grooves in it to make it feel natural upon that transition. So you're not fighting it, but that Zoom bag's helping.
Yeah.
And then an incredibly soft upper. This Vaporposit was a bit of labor of love, but it really came together nicely in the end.
Exactly. Now, obviously the Mercurial has had a big impact. We've seen, you know, 17 generations. How do you think that the Mercurial shaped football boots as like a silo, as a concept?
Yeah, Mercurial was Nike doing what we do best, right? Thinking outside of the box. We didn't have a choice at the time, right? We were the newcomers in the game.
Yeah.
So we thought outside of the box, and then we had the innovation to match kind of those aspirations of where we wanted to take it. But as we've kind of been talking, right, our commitment to innovation, whether it's worked, whether it hasn't, right? We've learned from that. We've continued to double down on that innovation. And then it's one of the first times I feel that football boots have given players that ability to express themselves in the game on pitch, right? So when you bring together that Mercurial mentality with the innovation in a package that looks incredible, you have that magic sauce.
Exactly. So 17 generations to choose from. Which is your personal favorite?
I'm a bit biased because I've worked on this baby for the past about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So I am going to go with, actually I'd go with the Vapor 15 personally. I like the feel of that Vapor. That would be mine.
Absolutely. If I say Vapor 11, what do you say?
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a boot.
It is.
Yeah.
It is a brilliant football boot.
Absolutely.
And one last thing, you know, in terms of, we have so many boots to choose from. One is your personal favorite, but if we have to choose one Mercurial that is the most iconic in terms of how much it changed, how much innovation there was, how successful it was in terms of being visually iconic, performance-wise iconic, what would you say is like the pinnacle Mercurial boot?
I think it has to be 98.
Yes.
Right? Because you think of football boots prior to that for 50, 75 years, they're all the same, right? It was peanut butter approach across. And that revolutionized the game visually, performance-wise. It's a game changer.
And here we are, so many years later, and there's still some DNA from that one in that one.
Absolutely.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, mate. Looking forward to seeing what you have in store for us in the future.
Absolutely.
So maybe we'll have a talk in 10 years.
Let's do it.
See where we are. So that was 17 generations of the Nike Mercurial and loads of innovation. To be fair, some has worked better than others. But which is your favorite version of the Mercurial? As always, let me know in the comment section right down below. And remember that if you want to buy the new Mercurial, you can do so from the link to Unisport right over there. Of course, also remember that if you, for some reason, haven't subscribed to the channel just yet, click the subscribe button with the bell notifications on to join one of the best football families here on YouTube. And finally, if you like to learn cool football skills, the playlist right down there is absolutely amazing. With those words, I'll be signing off. Cheerio.